July 2, 1943. Castelvetrono airstrip in Sicily. The pilot of the Faller Wolf 190 failed to notice the P-40 Warhawk descending rapidly from above until bullets from its machine guns ripped into his plane's body, causing the fighter to careen down toward the Sicilian terrain. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, who was 22 years old and hailed from Brazil, Indiana, had just accomplished a feat that German Luftwaffe leaders thought unattainable. An African-American pilot had downed one of their prestigious fighters. The swastika that was marked on Hall's P-40L Warhawk that day marked the initial enemy kill of 112 to be made by the individuals whom the Germans, it was said, would later name Schwarze Vogelmenschen, or Black Birdmen. According to Nazi German racial ideology, black individuals were labeled as Untermensch, or subhuman, unfit to operate advanced machinery or to display valor in warfare. The Nuremberg laws had prohibited marriage between Germans and anyone of African heritage. However, in the skies above the Mediterranean, these beliefs were about to dramatically clash with the facts as 992 skilled aviators from Tuskegee, Alabama, would methodically destroy both German planes and German presumptions about racial dominance. In 1943, when Luftwaffe flyers ascended to challenge American bombers, they were unprepared to encounter some of the best trained and most determined fighter pilots in the whole United States Army Air Force's, men who had overcome barriers never imposed on their white peers, undergone training that was longer and more strenuous than regular pilots, and entered combat bearing not just the call of national service but also the responsibility of proving the merit of their entire race. The figures of aerial warfare would soon become clear over European skies. 15,000 combat flights, 1,578 operations, 112 enemy planes shot down, and a bomber escort loss percentage notably lower than that of white fighter squadrons. Numbers that would compel even the staunchest Nazi believers to face the emptiness of their racial doctrines. The path to that initial victory in air combat started, not on the battlefield, but within the divisive world of racial segregation in the United States. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College released a document named Employment of Negro Manpower in War, which asserted, compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. This sanctioned military report asserted that black soldiers did not have the intellect for technical tasks or the bravery to lead in battle. Nevertheless, despite these lingering biases among military officials, a handful of black Americans were already demonstrating their error. Eugene Bullard had flown for France in the First World War because he was barred from serving America. Bessie Coleman had to earn her pilot's license in France in 1921, as American aviation schools at the time would not admit her. By the 1930s, Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics had produced many black civilian aviators, proving that expertise in flying was not limited by race. As the threat of war in Europe increased, the call for reform grew stronger. Activists such as Walter White from the NAACP, labor organizer A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie continually pushed for African American participation in military flight. African American publications The Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Baltimore Afro-American challenged the Roosevelt administration with a direct question. How could the United States promote democracy abroad while withholding it at home? On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 gave the first official opening. Senator Harry H. Schwartz had added a provision mandating that the Civilian Pilot Training Initiative must include at least one school, chosen by the Civil Aeronautics Authority, dedicated to preparing Negro aviators. Though this was a reluctant allowance marked by segregation, it marked the start of change. When Franklin Roosevelt campaigned for a third term in 1940, unprecedented in history, he required support from black voters in several northern urban centers. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson revealed the establishment of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black aviation unit. The declaration included a qualification that exposed the military's attitude. This was to serve as a test to determine if African Americans could be molded into combat pilots. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. recognized the responsibility of leadership as he guided 26 aviators of the 99th Fighter Squadron to North Africa in April 1943. Davis, whose father was the nation's first black general, had suffered through 4 years of social isolation at West Point, where white cadets ignored him except when duty required. Now he led men who bore not only their personal ambitions but also those of 13 million black citizens. The 99th was stationed at Farjuna, Tunisia, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Mommy, a leader who openly doubted the abilities of black pilots. Meagher assigned them to Mediterranean patrols, deliberately steering them clear of major engagements. He anticipated their failure, and when they did not achieve instant success, he used it as his justification. The dawn of June 2, 1943 signaled their initial foray into combat. The target was the Italian-occupied island of Pantelleria. As their battered P-40 Warhawks ascended toward the objective, German fighter planes abruptly appeared. The Tuskegee aviators maintained their formation, shielding their bombers. Both sides emerged without losing any aircraft, though the Germans received their first important lesson. These aviators would not yield in stressful situations. Yet it was July 2, 1943 that proved transformative. Charles Hall participated in his 8th sortie, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers on a strike against Castelvetrano Air Base in Sicily. 2 Fowler-Wolf 190s swooped down upon the bomber group. Hall later recounted, "I spotted 2 Fowler-Wolves tailing the bombers just after the payloads had been released. I moved to intercept between the fighters and the bombers, managing to turn inside the Jerry's path. I unleashed a lengthy burst and observed my rounds hitting the second plane. It tried banking left but then abruptly went down, heading straight for the ground." Upon Hall's return to base, everyone erupted in celebration. African-American ground crews who had tolerated months of slights and mistreatment from white personnel now had their definitive response. Hall's success stood as the first aerial victory achieved by a black American pilot in the history of the U.S. military. By January 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron had seen 7 months of combat, but Colonel Meyer submitted a harsh report stating they were not aggressive enough and recommending their withdrawal from combat operations. This report was delivered to General Henry Hap Arnold, who was readying to end the experiment entirely. But then Anzio occurred. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe carried out sizable attacks against the Allied troops at the Anio beachhead. 15 pilots from the 99th, flying outdated P-40s, met the more advanced Fowler-Wolf 190s in combat over the front. The ensuing action would quell detractors permanently. The 99th succeeded in shooting down several enemy planes. Different records cite between 8 and 13 kills over those 2 days. Captain Charles Hall added 2 more victories, increasing his tally to 3. Over the course of those 2 days and despite having inferior aircraft, they destroyed more enemy planes than they had throughout their preceding 7 months in battle. The War Department undertook an investigation comparing the 99th to other P-40 squadrons, ultimately concluding that their performance matched that of their white counterparts. The achievement at Anzio demonstrated that black aviators were capable of outstanding performance in combat when provided the chance. In May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group, which united the 99th, 100th, 3001st, and 3002nd Fighter Squadrons, received orders that would shift their status from outsiders to heroes. They were to join the 15th Air Force as bomber escorts, undertaking extended and perilous flights deep into Nazi-controlled Germany. Colonel Benjamin Davis assembled his flyers at Ramitelli Airstrip on the Adriatic shore of Italy. He emphasized, "We cannot afford to lose bombers." He told his men, "Our mission is not to become aces. Our task is to ensure those bombers get back safely." This command would shape their combat approach. Never leave the bombers under any circumstance. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining implemented a structured color coding system for fighter units. Each group would be allocated unique colors for immediate recognition. The 332nd was designated the color red. This meant not simply red noses or stripes, but the whole tail section painted scarlet. The P-51 Mustangs with their crimson tails, as well as red propeller tips and nosebands, became unmistakable in the skies. The initial bomber crews to receive these red-tail escorts had no idea their defenders were black pilots. What they recognized was that these fighters stayed close, never departing their side for the chance at easy aerial victories. Rumors spread among bomber units. If possible, get the red tails assigned to you. July 18, 1944 would impose the greatest challenge yet on the red tails. Colonel Davis commanded 66 Mustangs to meet bombers aiming at the Luftwaffe airfield in Memmingen, Germany. The bombers arrived behind schedule. Davis made a pivotal choice: to circle within hostile territory instead of returning home. When the bombers at last came into view, so too did the Luftwaffe, with about 100 German fighters launching attacks from several angles. The Germans had discovered that using superior numbers could potentially penetrate the Red Tails' defensive lines. Even with determined resistance by the 332nd, who counted 11 to 12 enemy planes down, 15 B-17s were shot down by hostile aircraft in a span of 20 brutal minutes. The 332nd lost 3 of its own pilots, Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics argued that the heavy bomber losses showed that black pilots were unfit for large-scale engagements. However, after-action assessment uncovered the reality. The 332nd had entered a dire scenario with large German forces already attacking the bombers. Their stand had averted total catastrophe.